For many years, almost somewhere between 50 and 60 years, the Inter-County Connector has been on the books. There have been 3 significant studies, draft environmental impact statements, and they all have been rejected by the environmental review agencies such as the Corps of Engineers and the EPA. And throughout that process, the laws to protect water quality and the environment overall have been the basis of those rejections. We are now in a situation in which the regulatory agencies have approved and in essence undone many years of protecting these resources. It was a bad idea to start with. It's a bad idea now. All these trees will be gone, all cut down.
Now we know what happens when we don't act. When we just sit back and say that it's useless and to just let the politicians have their way, then this is the result.
The need for this road is largely a myth in that it will relieve traffic congestion, because that is simply not the fact. Even in the State Highway Administration's own documentation, they say that this road will not improve traffic congestion. In fact, it will actually increase local congestion. So the Inter-County Connector is a myth that is perpetuated by those who stand to gain financially or politically from building this road. The real impetus for this road is a massive development on the eastern end called Conterra, which will be a large residential and business development. Think of Reston or Columbia. And at this point, that is largely an abandoned quarry. And there are some very influential property owners who make large contributions to political campaigns that have for many years advocated the people who own that land and have plans to develop it need to have the Inter-County Connector in place in order to justify going forward with this massive development. The orange fence is the limits of disturbance for the Inter-County Connector. All the trees here will be gone, and there'll be a 6-lane highway through here. And you can see there's a small area of forest that will remain. And in the distance you can see the red brick of Drew Elementary School. So just on the other side of those trees, we have 2 athletic fields from Drew Elementary, where children will be playing on a daily basis and exposed to all of the toxics, the emissions and heavy metals that are the result of a 6-lane highway going past an elementary school. Several scientific studies recently released that quantify the impacts of these pollutants on humans, and in particular, children's lungs are more sensitive than adults. And some of the same pollutants that are in automobile and truck emissions have been identified as causing tumors in fish when those pollutants are in water. So do we have to wait until we have tumors on children at Drew Elementary before we realize the environmental impacts of these emissions on our lives and on our children? What we have here is science. It's factual. We know this to be the case. However, it is being swept under the rug by transportation proponents. Well, what we have here is a first-order stream, just the beginnings of what ultimately will become a river and eventually flows into the Chesapeake Bay. And it's many, many of these small streams that combine to form the rivers that flow into the Chesapeake Bay. And the way to clean up the Chesapeake Bay is to clean up each of these individual tributaries. There's a reason that this area has been preserved for all of these years, and that is largely that the Good Hope tributary is the primary spawning and nursery area for the Paintbranch wild trout. The crossings and the loss of cold water recharge and the runoff, I think, will inevitably result in the destruction of this wild trout fishery. State Highway really skewed the data when they did the noise study for the environmental impact statement. The 4F process, which is what prevented the ICC from being built in the previous two studies to a large extent, was just totally ridiculous. It was nothing but a sham in this last study, which is what allowed the process to move forward. It's almost been a perfect storm of regulatory conditions that have combined to enable the intercounty connector process to be approved and in fact going forward. So this is a cascade of bad decisions, one after another, that led us to this situation, and it is just hard to believe. Look, we know what causes global warming and environmental degradation: CO2, cars, removal of trees. Why would we go forward with such a devastation? Everybody's smarter today about environmental impacts, about transportation. We know we're going to have to make changes in our mobility, how we get around, and it just doesn't make sense. Why would we go forward with a 50-year-old highway concept when we know that we need to make changes? The ICC is yesterday's infrastructure. We have more than enough highways throughout this area, and I think what's really lacking is a natural space where we can go and enjoy nature as it stands. Do we want this mulch to be our future as opposed to naturally wooded habitat?
What you see behind me is just a remnant of what used to be a huge healthy forest here in Mill Creek. But this landscape has been transformed and has been destroyed by the construction of the intercounty connector. And because this landscape and this forest was destroyed, we have destroyed part of the Chesapeake Bay watershed and its ability to filter out pollution and to keep our clean water clean. So instead, we have a lot of mud that during construction, some of it, despite all the engineering efforts to filter it, some of it is making its way into Mill Creek and into the Potomac River, and thus is harming the bay as we speak. And then once this highway is finished here, then every single time it rains, more storm water will flow into Mill Creek and thus downstream into the bay, and will bring thousands of pounds of pollutants with it. And so not only this whole landscape here has been transformed and bulldozed, but also the neighborhood has been destroyed by this gigantic construction project with all of the noise, pollution, and once this highway is built, then there will be the additional air pollution and the dangers involved with the highway. It's up to each and every one of us to take responsibility to make the change that we need to see. If we stop the ICC now, we can save both forests and streams and a great deal of money.